Welcome from across this gorgeous planet. We are one church, many paths, one mountain, where our mission is what Barbara Marx Hubbard and Dr. Mark Goffney call the planetary awakening in love through a unique self symphony. And together we declare that the last day of the old face of evolution is honored as the first day of the new face of creation. I am Christina Tehel, the co-executive producer, along with Krista Josepha and Kirsten Zohar, and I am delighted to be here with each and every one of you today. I welcome all the new people. Please do share you are new in the chat box. We want to hear from you. When you do chat to everyone by checking that your chat settings say all panelists and attendees and not just all panelists. Use the chat function to say hi, to let us know where you're from, and to resonate the Dharma. In one church, many paths, one mountain. We are connected, we are whole, and we are expressions of the entire process of creation. We are activating a new humanity, and we are awakening as a new species. Homo amor, the fulfillment of Homo sapien. We are a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a temple, a zendo. We are all of it. No one is excluded. Everyone is included. And we come together to attune to the evolutionary impulse awakening within us. Welcome home, everyone. We're overjoyed to be with you today in week 199. Let everyone know about one church, many paths, one mountain. We're doing this primarily through word of mouth. Barbara talked about each of us having a family of 10 here in church, each of us tending our evolutionary family. And I can let you know that leadership around church is indeed a sacred opportunity. On YouTube, we are one church, many paths, one mountain. On Facebook, we are facebook.com/onechurch.world. Right now, we are streaming live on YouTube and on Facebook. Take a moment and copy either of the links from the Zoom chat box and share those live links on your favorite social media channels like Facebook or Twitter. After church, we will send you an email to invite your friends and family, and forward that email right after church. Spend time on our website, www.onechurch.world. On the top menu of the homepage or the bottom of each page, you will find our membership links. With that, I give you a little bit of what to expect over this next hour. We begin with a Dharma recap, then Dr. Mark sets our intention, then David resonates the evolutionary love code that we are working with, then we move into prayer, then our sermons, and then when we close, we bring everyone on for our goodbyes. Mark wrote what he called evolutionary love codes. Mark and Barbara studied those codes together, often comparing them with Barbara's own 52 codes for conscious self-evolution. These codes grew out of their radical commitment over 100 collective years, crystallizing the new story of humanity. Quote, evolving the course of consciousness and culture, which is the source code of love, unquote. Each church is a standalone, and every week's church builds on the week before. One church, many paths, one mountain is radically committed to telling the new story. So here goes my Dharma recap from last week's church. Birthing the new political body through the personal body. There are explosions all over the world today for justice. There isn't an equal playing field. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is too big. That is a violation of spirit, of God's face. It can't be that way. Light doesn't push other light away. One light makes room for another light. One voice makes room for another voice. We're in this time, though, between stories where we need a set of first principles that envision a genuine democratization of enlightenment, of greatness, of opening the world heart, a shift from Homo sapiens to Homo amor, from an ego-driven, grasping, win-lose metrics to a new understanding based on interior and exterior science first principles. These first principles are grounded in the ontologizing of love, knowing that love is real. Love is not weak. Love is strong. That the evolution of love is the evolution of politics, and the failure of love is the failure of politics. There is no split. The greatest slave driver in the world is the belief that yesterday determines today. We give up when we believe, oh my God, my yesterdays, there's too much of a pattern. I can't get out of it. I give up. Coded in the body is the oppression of the structure of society. And if we want to create a new society, we heal at the root and create a heart that breathes outrageous love, and a body that understands the dignity of desire and knows how to clarify desire. It's all located in the individual human's lived experiences, in spirit, in realization, in enlightenment, in eros that's encrypted in the body sacred. The Bill of Rights and the first principles are encrypted in the body sacred. It's gradual, it's not sudden, it's step by step, detail by detail, poignancy by poignancy, kiss by kiss. We see each other. We write each other outrageous love letters. We tell each other the stories of our outrageous acts of love. We let each other be witnessed. We feel each other's quality. We realize we are not alone. We realize we are at the farthest stages of the emergence of the self-reflective human. We've come so far. We've gotten to universal human rights, democracy, social mobility. We never let go of the dream. We never give up. The impulse of doing more, being more, loving more is life purpose in each one of us, and keeps challenging us to move further onward. We understand that the political, the embodied, the existential, the spiritual transformation are the same. We understand that the fundamental movement of reality is the movement from loneliness to loving, from alienation to integration, from fragmentation to union. It is the basic movement of evolution that Homo sapiens, the self-reflective human, will now triumph at the next level. Just like that, just like matter goes through many stages, stars, galaxies, planets, just like life goes from the first prokaryotes to multicellular organisms, all the way up to animals, and then life explodes as the human being. Homo sapiens goes through all the levels, and now Homo sapiens seek triumph as Homo Amor. With that, I invite us to more deeply enter into the holy and sacred space of one church, many paths, one mountain. And I turn my word to you, beloved Dr. Mark Goffney.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my God, Christina Amlon, we're just going to applaud around the world for that beautiful, beautiful recapitulation of the Dharma. And I just want to say to honor that so deeply, right? A recapitulation is a movement in symphony, right? It's a particular movement in which you take the exact notes and you rearrange their order, right? Exact words, exact sentences, but you rearrange their order and you pass it through your own unique self. And then when you share it, right, in this rearrangement, right, it becomes a new, beautiful emergent. And how beautiful. And we could actually talk about every single line, right, of this new story, right, that we heard in this gorgeous recapitulation. And I want to understand what we're doing here. So welcome, everyone, right? It's so good. Thank you so much, Christina Amlon. And it's so gorgeous to be here at this time of enormous peril and enormous promise and potency, poignancy, right, and pain beyond imagination. And they all live together. I'm in Florida, right, in Coconut Grove. And we've actually tried to set up a little bit. We got some books up behind me, as you can see, which is fantastic. It's always good to have some books up. And who are we? And this is the moment where we set our intention. And after we set our intention, we're going to resonate, right? Resonate first with a chant, Homo Amor, right? The Amor chant. Amor means love. And we are, as the recapitulation said so accurately, one of our core missions, and it's a deep mission, and it's not simple, and it's not surface, and it's not superficial, is to ontologize love. So I'm just going to go to the chat box for a second with everyone's permission to ontologize love, right? And I have a sense of like, what does that mean? What do we mean? So I want to try and create some language together to ontologize love. So anyone who wants to write in the chat box what it means to ontologize love, right? What does that word mean? To ontologize love. So ontology means for realsies, right? For realsies is not an exact phrase, but for realsies means for real, right? There's a Hebrew word for it, which is M-A-M-A-S-H, mamash. And mamash means it's not just a feeling, it's ontology, it's for real, it's aligned with the very structure of the cosmos, right? And I was talking, in this ongoing conversation with my beloved evolutionary partner, Barbara Marx Hubbard. And Barbara's passed into, right, a different realm, not available, right, easily in this realm. And we were talking the other day about this notion of ontologizing, meaning my story, my experience is not just my story. It's not merely a psychological story. It's not a story about my grandiosity, right? It's a story about my grandness. And one of the things I want to talk about today, that's going to be the focus today, is why stories are so important. Our topic today is going to be story, and why story is essential to moving beyond loneliness. and why loneliness, which is going to be the third and final week we're going to focus on loneliness and on the code of loneliness, why the movement from loneliness to loving is not an individual psychological move, but it's actually cosmos moving through me. And why the movement from isolation to integration, right? From separation to interpenetration, from dissociation, right, to allurement and harmony, right? From loneliness to loving, why that movement is an essential movement of cosmos itself. And why my loneliness is actually the call of the beloved. My loneliness is not a mistake. My loneliness is literally the call of the beloved. And I can only transmute my loneliness by actually realizing and hearing the call and then beginning to tell my story. So we're going to talk about that, but in a very, very deep way and in a new way, and we're going to offer a new set of principles. What we're doing here, right, in one communion, right, one church, and we're talking about a whole conversation internally about actually up-leveling our name the next level to one communion, right? One love, one communion, many paths, one mountain, right? Changing the world through outrageous love, right? We're about a planetary mission. We're on a planetary mission. And we are realizing and understanding that we are in a phase shift, in a time between worlds, a time between stories. And like in the Renaissance, like in that Marcello Ficino or Leonardo da Vinci moment in the Renaissance, in that time between worlds, we've been confronted by a plague. Just like there was the Black Death and the plague at that moment, we have our own version of the plague. And the plague is horrific. And people can't breathe. And people are dying all over the world. And we need to deal medically with the plague in every possible level. But we're also seeing something deeper. We're seeing that the plague is speaking to the essential fault lines in our society. The insane gap between the wealthy and those who are not playing on an even playing field. The insane gap in opportunity, the insane gap in potential for joy and potential fulfillment, and potential for creativity. And along those fault lines, the death rates from corona are triple in disadvantaged and poor communities around the world. We're seeing that our supply lines are vulnerable and fragile in a fundamental way. We're seeing that there's no global coherence in our response. I mean, within countries, take the United States, literally 50 states are all responding separately to a coronavirus that knows no boundaries, and every country in the world is responding separately and individually without genuine coordination, right, to a coronavirus that knows no boundaries. That's insane. But it's not an accident. The coronavirus itself is rooted in a global intimacy disorder, which we talked about at great length as the virus started. A lack of a shared story, which means you can't have global coherence, which means you cut out poor populations and they eat pangolins or bats in Wuhan, China, or you test, right, in an inappropriate way and actually generate the virus, or you actually possibly release the virus. One country might release the virus intentionally, right, to disrupt economies and to disrupt, right, the actual balances in the world of power in ways that are violent and inappropriate. And the Chinese Communist Party is absolutely, right, tragically, not the Chinese people who are gorgeous, but the Chinese Communist Party, like Stalin, like Mao, are bad actors, right, in this story, right, in a very, very serious way. So wow, there's this global intimacy disorder. And that's the actual cause of our global action paralysis and of our global pandemic. So what we need to do is, we need to, at this moment where we're between dystopia and utopia, when the pandemic is just the beginning, right, of a series of stages of potential dystopian unfolding that we've been talking about for the last 10 years and 20 years. And I've been talking about it at the think tank. Barbara Marx Hubbard has been talking about it for several decades. And we came together, the Foundation for Conscious Evolution and the Center for Integral Wisdom, And we launched this independent program called One Church, Many Paths, One Mountain to articulate a new set of first principles and a new Dharma, an integration of the best of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern into a new story. Because the world is an expression and we act out of a story. The world itself is a story. Right? There's a narrative arc to reality, right? From the first Big Bang of this physiosphere, right? Matter, then to the next Big Bang of life and the next Big Bang of self-reflective mind. And each Big Bang triumphs on the one before it. Matter triumphs as life and life triumphs as the self-reflective human mind. And those 4 sentences are an entire book, an entire world. And now the self-reflective human mind, Homo sapien, needs to triumph to the next level. Homo sapien needs to become Homo amor. We actually need to generate a new human and a new humanity based on first principles. And we can't deal with genetics, and we can't deal with poverty, right? And we can't deal with inequality, and we can't deal with pandemic, and we can't deal with biological weapons, and we can't deal with nuclear weapons, and we can't deal with methane gas under the tundra, and we can't deal with the extraction model, right, which creates a self-terminating growth explosion. We can't deal with any of the issues of catastrophic or existential risk without actually a new story. That's what we're going to be talking about. And we need to understand the new story. We need to understand our place in the new story, and in a deep and profound way. That's the planetary mission at this moment in time. The most effective thing we can do at this moment in time, the most effective altruism at this moment is to come together as Da Vinci, right? We are Da Vinci together, and to be the revolutionaries with people all over the world, and to actually articulate, not based on declaration, but on the deepest process of self-awakening, of intense study, footnotes abound, an intense reading, intense integration, and to actually be at that leading edge of evolution in the most privileged place, and to actually put it all together and to articulate a story in which everyone has a place. And we actually come together in this larger story, in this new shared intimacy that emerges from the larger story, that emerges from the shared set of first principles, which are the matrix, the plot lines of the larger story, actually generate a global coherence, the likes of which we've never seen. So then instead of kind of moving into a dystopian dream, there's a slow, emergent dystopian dream around the world. That dream will get turned around. And we're going to spend the next 5 years right in our community, right, day and night, researching, talking, studying, and writing. Next week, we're coming together, beginning next Monday. If someone can put it in the chat box, that'd be unbelievable. We'll hear from Shahati later. We're coming together next Monday for 5 days, and we're going to do this deep dive into from pandemic to pleasure. Now, why would we be talking about pleasure? Because pleasure drives cosmos. You cannot understand the quantum world, right? There's a kind of what one scientist calls a quantum hedonism that drives the quantum world, right? The animal world, right? The human world, right? Eros, aliveness, pleasure are the source of all movements in cosmos. And on the human level, pleasure awakens as ethics. Actually, our understandings of pleasure are the source of all our ethics. If we don't actually have a lived experience of the aliveness and goodness of reality, we don't have a lived experience of pleasure. There's 10 voices of pleasure we're going to enter. There's 22 principles of pleasure. And most importantly, there are 6 distinct levels of pleasure. And there's a different price of admission for each one. And there's counterfeit forms of each level. Right? It's a map of reality. You can't understand power. You can't understand sexuality. You can't understand economics. You can't understand politics. You can't understand relationships without this map, this new map of pleasure, which we're going to be articulating. We're going to start meeting next Monday morning. And don't come because it's going to blow your life away. It will. It's gorgeous. We're going to have an enormous interchange, and you're going to have insight. You'll share your insight in the chat box and in groups and in afternoon groups. But come because you want to participate in the evolution of love. Come because you want to be not part of the problem, but part of the solution. Come because, right, we need you and you need us, and there's no we and there's no us. There's just all of us together. All of us together. We want to have a seat at the table. And we want to have a seat at the table and literally blowing it away and loving it open. Be Da Vinci. Step in, right? You always think, where's my seat at the table? Why am I not? No, you've got a seat at the table. You're here because you have a seat at the table, because we're together, because we're doing this together. And if I seem too urgent or too passionate about this, I apologize. But I can't apologize sincerely because it's urgent. But it's an ecstatic urgency. right? The privilege, right, of being alive, right? Just so we're so wildly privileged. Are we in together? Are we in? Shahat, give us a moment, right, before we go to Amor and before we go to the code for this week. Shahat, if you can, give us a moment and just blow us away, right, in festival and where it is and what's going on and right and the whole story. Can you do that, Shahati? Is that okay? Take us away.
Hello, guys.
Oh my
Yes,
God.
it's only 1 week, and we are so excited and diving into all kinds of awesome details. But what I want to especially invite you today is like the Dharma you'll get on pleasure and pleasure as ethics and pleasure drives the cosmos is amazing. It's so amazing. You'll be blown away, as it did me, and as I'm totally looking forward to hearing it again and being transmitted to it again. Then there is also, it's not just an online conference. We're actually, this morning we were together with our dear friends and colleagues, James and Mickey from Belgium, and we were actually creating the whole container around evolutionary families on groups and how you can get challenged, how you can get together, find each other, share, deepen your understanding. So it's a whole big happening, which is so important for this time. So a very short invitation, come, show up, step in with us. I give my word back to you, beloved Mark.
Thank you, Shahati. Thank you, Shahati. Yay. Yay, who's in? Let's just take a look at the chat box. Who's in for the festival? Right, again, the festival is, right, like, yes, who's in? Right, who's in? Right, let's do this together. Let's totally do this together. Right, and, you know, I mean, let's be all in. Right, this is a moment to be all in. It's the 10th to the 14th. And just show up and let your heart blow open. And we're going to be talking to each other both again in small groups, right in the chat box. And it's going to be an incredible, incredible 5 days for the sake of the evolution of love. Okay?
Yes.
So that's the difference. I want to make this distinction, right? And I make this distinction between self-help. We're not doing self-help. Self-help is how can I get more out of it? Right? I want to get more out of it. We're doing transformation. We're doing the new story. Transformation is not self-help. Self-help is how can I get more out of it? Transformation is how can I step more deeply into it? You get the difference? Who gets the difference? Right? It means how can I step more deeply in? And when I step more deeply in, of course my heart's blown away. Right? Of course, right? It all explodes, right? In joy. And in agony and ecstasy in the middle of the joy. We're holding the agony, we're holding the ecstasy. Right? We cry out of one side of our mouth. We laugh out of the other side of our mouth. But self-help is, right, it's a set of hacks to get more out, right? And that doesn't work in the end. Transformation is, and I'm stepping in, I want to step in so deeply, right? And the core is telling the new story. Just like democracy is a news story, right? 1,000 years ago, who would have thought that people can actually choose governance? That people can actually vote? People can actually decide who their elected officials are. That was a new story that you were burned at the stake for 1,000 years ago. And now we get that democracy is important. Democracy itself is falling apart. Democracy doesn't quite work anymore. We need to actually up-level democracy to a next level. That's part of the new story. Okay, so here we go. Let's start with Amor. Okay, Amor is its insides are lined with love. The ontologizing of love. Love is real. It's the actual force, the eros, that drives and holds cosmos and that animates the four forces, the strong and the weak nuclear, the electromagnetic, the gravitational. And we understand that all those forces are part of a larger field, right? The cosmological principle that Albert Einstein talked about, that actually it's the same essential field all through cosmos. And we're learning more and more about how those are actually one field. The larger field is a field of eros. What's eros? And it's the experience of radical aliveness, of allurement that drives cosmos all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain. And it moves towards, it seeks ever deeper intimacy, which means parts that create greater wholes, that are more creative, that are more loving, that are more coherent. So the movement of Eros is the movement of radical aliveness, allured to, desiring ever deeper contact and intimacy and ever greater wholeness. That's a huge sentence. That's literally like E equals MC squared, that fundamental definition of Eros. It works across all sciences, across all of economics, in enormous detail. And the next 5 years is going to be about writing a lot of that. That's Eros. That's the Eros that moves and lives in me. That's Amor. That's what Amor means. So take us into Amor. Take us into Amor, Christina Amelon, Suzette, into Amor. And let's just feel Lady Krista, our lead executive producer. Take us into Amor. Yay. Amor, Lady Krista, thank you so much. Beautiful, right? Amor, its insides are lined with love. David, take us into the code. It's gorgeous, Amor. Take us inside, David. Thank you,
Thank you,
Krista.
Dr. Mark.
Yay.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited for the festival. Hope everyone here
Yeah.
is already registered. I feel like, last year it was almost like a wave carrying me through. I stepped in and then there was something larger that took over. And this year, I think we have access to people from all over the world who otherwise wouldn't have been able to come. So please join us. I'm so excited. So as I resonate the code, let's find that desire within us to connect to larger and larger circles of intimacy, as Dr. Mark always invites us. The fundamental movement of reality is the movement from loneliness to loving, from alienation to integration, from fragmentation to union. This is the movement of Eros. On the inside, Eros feels like pleasure. The failure of Eros feels like pain. And I turn my word back to you, Dr. Mark.
David, thank you. Right? I mean, it's an incredible code, right? It's got kind of everything in it, right? This movement, the fundamental movement of reality, right? David reads, thank you, David, beautifully, right? It's from loneliness to loving, right? It's a fundamental movement of reality, right? It's the movement of Eros itself. And so we want to understand, this is our third week, right? In this code, we want to understand loneliness. And we're going to talk about it, right, deeply with myself, with Barbara, right, after prayer, because prayer is about, as Plotinus said, the lonely one meeting the lonely one. So let's feel this deeply. There's an infinite field. But that infinite field is not without explosions of fullness. It's not empty space. The image of empty space is a huge and fundamental mistake, right? Space itself, right, is moved by this constant set of exploded allurements, right? Space itself is an expression. Space-time and the space-time continuum is an expression of the infinite exploding into the intimate. So stay close. This is core to the interior sciences, and without which we can't even begin to talk about physics or evolutionary science. The field of the infinite stirs. Abhinavagupta writes, right, one of the great interior sciences, there's a stirring of desire in the infinite. There's a stirring towards greater intimacy. There's a yearning. And if you want to sum it up in one sentence, the infinite doesn't want to have lunch alone. Okay, that's the deepest metaphysics in the world. And it's implicitly correct and self-evidently correct. How do you know? Here we are in one communion. Here we are. Why are we here? Why, as Schelling said, is there something rather than nothing? There's an intentionality in cosmos. Ignore the fact, you don't even have to bring that into play, but that the statistical impossibility of the level of dazzling coherence. I've spent the last 2 weeks in intense rereading of certain dimensions of evolutionary science. So I was reading, for example, right, how the first eukaryote cells, right, and I'm reading intensely in multiple books, come into existence. To even begin to get the dazzling beauty and complexity, right, which wildly exceeds exponentially all of our supercomputers exponentialized, right, in terms of the infinite, virtually infinite complexity of the process, and how much is happening in every second, billions of interactions happening in every second, right, at the bacteria level, right, all over the planet, right, which then birth the next level, which birth the next level until we get to the eukaryote, to the multicellular movement of cosmos, which ultimately births the multicellular organism, which is the source of all the later forms of life, including ourselves, right? How that happens, right, is an expression, a function of a constant movement of cosmos towards new intimacies. That's a constant movement, and it's, again, right, think supercomputer exponentialized in terms of complexity. That's happening in every second. Now, just to know, that's happening in your body right now. Now, your body right now is not evolving towards a new level of cosmos. Your body is an expression of everything that came before, right, and is the most stunningly, gorgeously, super exponentially, right, computational, right, feeling expression of cosmos, which is utterly unique and unlike any other. And if you would go inside your body now, it wouldn't be Alice in Wonderland. It would be Alice in Wonderland exponentialized. And I'm using that word a lot today, exponentialized, because there's no other way to even begin to think about your nerve endings, to begin to think about the billions of neurons, to begin to think about the billions and billions and trillions and trillions and trillions of neurons, right? The 37.1, unique cells, right? Trillion unique cells that make up your body, and how they're working in complementarity, and how your body is both the same as every other and ultimately unique, a unique signature of infinity. Infinity signed its name as you. I mean, it's all so wildly shocking, right? You're an intimate expression. And let's see if we can kind of get this deeply, get this first principle. It's a first principle of the interior sciences. So imagine that you know a bunch of people. So I'm just kind of looking at let's say I know Christina Amlon, and I know Shahat Kortan, and I know David, right? And I know Mark, and I know Christina, and I know Ken, and I know Claire, and I know Kristen, I know Suzette, right? And I know, right, Jacqueline, right? And I know Utz, and I know, right? I know, and I know Nathan, right? And I know, right, Oriana, right? And I know Joyce, right? And I know Joyce, right? Two different Joyces, right? And I know, right? And I said, right? And I just, right? And I know Jamie, right? So each person I know, and I don't know all those people, I know all those people in different levels, but each person I know, right, evokes a different part of me. But just think about that. Think about all the loves of your life, right? Every love of your life evokes a different part of you, right? So divinity in order to evoke the fullness of the infinite. The infinite's not static. The infinite is in its own paradoxical way evolving. So infinity individuates as you. Infinity individuates as Oriana, right? Reality, infinite reality, the infinity of intimacy, loved so much that she individuated as Oriana. So it's infinity having an Oriana experience. So when I have a conversation, right, if I'm privileged to have a conversation with Oriana, right, and we're talking, let's say we're talking about the 72 names of God, right? So it's actually God is talking to God. Infinity is talking to infinity. You can actually feel infinity looking through your eyes, infinity looking through the other person's eyes, and infinity is meeting infinity in a unique way. And so, for example, when we move from 500 million people to 7.7 billion people in cosmos, that means there's an infinite explosion of infinity individuating uniquely, which means there's more God. And when each of those people begins to awaken, right, which is where we need to move, where we begin to move towards a democratization of enlightenment. We begin to move towards a unique self-symphony, which every one of those unique people is now individuating and creating, right, and expressing new goodness, new truth, and new beauty. Then you have this explosion of the infinity of the intimacy, right, knowing itself through each one of these people, right, or the infinity of intimacy, God, the infinity of intimacy, knows itself through each of these individuated expressions and falls in love with itself, meaning with you, with me, right, time and again. Wow. That's actually this, but that's not a fanciful tale. That's the structure of cosmos, right? Wow. Right? Can you begin to get that? So what we're about to do is we're about to turn to the infinitive intimacy. We call it prayer. And we're going to bring all of our loneliness and all of our fullness. And we're going to lay it at the altar of the infinity of intimacy and say, right, take me, hold me. Let me tell you everything, my holy and my broken hallelujah, because there's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter which you heard. It's the holy and it's the broken hallelujah. And it doesn't matter, even if it all went wrong, right? I stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my lips but hallelujah. And hallelujah is drunken intoxication, holilut in the original Hebrew. Hallel, holilut. And it's the pristine praise of being on the inside and choosing life. Okay, so we're going to pray now. And to pray means to bring everything you have, right? Pour it all in. And then let it be received by the infinity of intimacy that knows your name, that individuated as you, and that holds you in every second. And from there, we're going to then come together in the chat box and ask for everything. Take us inside. Prayer, infinity of intimacy.
Now I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter which you heard, the holy or the broken. Hallelujah. I did my best. It wasn't much. I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I've told the truth. I didn't come to fool you. And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of Song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah.
Hallelujah. And we're in the chat box and we ask for everything. I ask for my Uncle Morris who's having an operation. I ask for someone who's out of money in the pandemic, right? And doesn't know how to pay the rent. I ask for full joy in my life so I can be on the inside. I ask to participate, right, in the planetary awakening and love and to play my note in the Unique Self Symphony. I ask for physical, spiritual, emotional. I ask for everything. And she's listening. Right? We know that, right? Just like I can hear you talking and you can hear me talking, and I hear out of my own intelligence, but my intelligence isn't separate from the larger field of intelligence. So if I can hear you talking and you can hear me talking, so you understand the larger field of intelligence hears every word. And that field of intelligence is not just the infinity of power, but is the infinity of intimacy. So prayer is real. Right? And you can actually feel it. It's a realization. It's not a dogma. It's an actual lived realization of the personhood of cosmos. So let's pray. Let's turn to the infinity of intimacy that literally knows your name, right? And loves you and loves me madly, right? And let's ask for everything. I pray, right? Thank you, Terry, right? I pray that my big brother Warren feel held and loved and not alone in his journey with Parkinson's. Like, wow, right? Let's pray for everything. Right? I pray for, oh my God, right? I pray for Bonnie Mae. I pray for all people to awaken to the truth and live and act through love. I thank God for health and breath. Liam, it's so good to see you. Liam, I pray for all my sick friends to feel connected to the infinity of intimate love continuously flowing towards them at every second. Oots, I pray for the continued, right, for the continued infinity of intimacy. Medea, I pray infinity continues to unfold and infold Ivan and I. Hallelujah. And all those joining us as we go through this rite of passage, the marriage of souls. Mazal Tov. Mazal Tov is a Jewish word. Congratulations, but it means actually good flow. May the Eros flow in you. Medea, we love you. Ivan, madly. Thank you. Sally Adams. Oh my God, Sally Adams. Sally Adams, I pray for the infinity of intimacy to reveal herself to me directly. Sally, thinking of you all the time, right? And waiting for you all the time and just pouring all of us love into you all the time, right? We need you so much, right? Oh my God, Inika, I pray for an enlightening festival of love online. Inika, thank you. Inika and Paul, right? Krista, I pray teach me and remind me to choose life over and over again through the contractions to show up, right, as she, for she, in my full power. And there's a phrase, we talked about it this morning, friends, right before church, a group of us met like we do every week, and we were preparing, and there's a beautiful phrase in the sacred texts, which is the great evolutionary phrase, and it's uvacharta b'chaim. If anyone wants to write it, therefore choose life. Right? When you step inside, you feel the evolutionary impulse living uniquely as you. You realize I am evolution. I don't need just to reach to my own personal psychology. I can move way beyond my trauma and way beyond the contraction and feel the current of life moving in me. And I choose that current. I choose to identify with the evolutionary impulse, with that life moving in me. So here's the phrase. Anyone wants to put it in the chat box, it'd be awesome. Therefore, choose life, right? When you choose life, we're like wildly excited. You just want to dance. Does anyone want to dance? Does anyone want to dance while we're in little? Let's dance. Let's dance. Who wants to dance? Ready? Anybody? Okay, who wants to get up and dance? Can we get up and dance? Right? We just choose life. We just dance. Who wants to dance? Who wants to dance? Anyone want to dance? Let's dance. Easy song, no words. Tom, you gonna dance with me? We'll dance. Himbai na ni na na himbai na ni na 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 hey ho himma na na ni na 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 himma na na ni na na himma na na hey ho himma na na ni na na himma na na ni na na himma na na ni na na himma na na hey ho. Right? Therefore, choose life. So wherever you are, wherever you're listening now, right, I'm going to read a couple of more prayers, but dance, right? Who's going to dance? I'm going to check in the chat box. Who wants to dance? Who wants to dance? Anyone want to dance? Who's dancing? Who's going to dance? Just wherever you are, just get up and dance. It's a choice, right? We choose life. I actually step into the dance of cosmos, right? Zorba the Greek. Do you remember Zorba the Greek? Who remembers Zorba the Greek? Nikos Kazantzakis. Who remembers that? Great. Who remembers? Anyone remember Zorba? Right, Raquel, I do, Zorba. So when it all falls apart, Zorba turns to the young man who the log and his great log mining business have all kind of gone awry and it's all gone crazy. And you've got this great scene in the movie where the logs kind of move down the mountain and everything collapses. And when it's all collapsed, Zorba turns to the man and he says, what does he say? Who remembers? What's the line? What does he say? Let's dance. Let's dance. Right, let's step back into the dance. And it's so beautiful, right? Right, and yes, we're going to follow the order of church exactly. Right, we're gonna go just in order, and we're going to be spontaneous as we read prayers for a moment. I'm going to get right back to prayer in 1 second, because Krista reminded me of what we talked about this morning right before church, and Christine and I talked about it here this morning, and we were dancing. Right, therefore choose life. Right, choose to enter the dance. And the dance sometimes is slow, and sometimes it's painful, and it's gorgeous beyond imagination. But I'm in the dance. And I can feel the molecules and electrons literally dancing in me. And I'm danced. It's not just that I'm dancing. I'm danced. When I sing, it's not just I'm singing, right? I'm being sung. I'm being lived. Right? That's actually the scientific reality of a cosmos, interior and exterior sciences, right? Therefore, choose life. Like, wow. So let's go back to prayers. Let's go back to prayers. And let's just read a couple more, like the most beautiful prayers ever, right? Therefore, choose life. Right? Therefore choose life. Right? Therefore choose life. I pray for Taylor, right? For a young girl who had brain surgery. Raquel, I pray, thank you. Thank you for what Joyce sang. Right? Joyce, Right? I pray for the deepest intimacy with breath down my nose, my mouth, all the way down, right? Right? Enlivening, quivering my life. Right? Yes, I pray for a marriage of breath and heart in me, Raquel. Right? Oh my God. Right? Right? A person whose address is Pleasure Now. That's fantastic. Right? I like that name. I pray we have a wondrous and awesome transmission of our vision and our way of outrageous love at the festival. Yes. Jacqueline, I pray for my friend Alana that she may be healed of her chronic illness. Right? Yes. Right? David, I pray for all the refugees and displaced peoples to find a home and experience every level of pleasure. Tom Renane, right, who's completing, right, the unique self-book now in these weeks. Let my gratitude for our gifts, your gifts, God, be so abundant that I can't help but give those gifts, right, manyfold into the world where they are most needed. Amen. Claire, I pray that my mother feel held and loved as she struggles with chronic pain. Right? Oh my God, right? Right? Oriana, I pray, Oriana, we're at your altar, Oriana. I pray to open as I'm adored of God. I receive and hold the prayers. Jamie, right? I pray to be Eros, co-creating homo amor. Enoch, I pray for a fulfilling relationship with my daughter. Zoa, I ask for Peter and I to find our way through this current crisis. And may our crisis be a birth. And may it birth whatever is the next beautiful way. Right? Zohar, yes. Right? Oh my God. Right? Therefore, choose life. Therefore, choose life. And we take all these prayers and we wrap them together, right, as the bouquet of this planetary awakening and love through this unique self-symphony, because that's what we're about. And we choose life and we lift these prayers to the sky. Right? Oh my God. Right? Oh my God. So, Lady Krista, right, before we go into, right, the next step, right, let's finish, right, one church, many paths, one mountain. We're going to finish, then we're going to go into our, you know what we do every week, everyone, right? We finish one communion, right, prayer. Then we're going to go into our sense making, and we're going to dive into the code of loneliness, right? And I'm going to try and talk about this code. We're going to offer an entirely next step, right? Every week we use this. This is an evolutionary, revolutionary gathering, and we're articulating different dimensions of first principles. So this week we're going to do loneliness, which is our basic code for this week. I'm going to talk about it. Barbara Marks Hubbard, Barbara's going to talk about it, and how we actually envision, right, as a cosmic principle and the most practical thing in your life and my life, because there's no difference between them, right? The movement from loneliness to loving as an essential part of the evolutionary story, and particularly why telling the evolutionary story is so wildly important, why story is so core to cosmos. We're going to talk about this notion of story and how it affects each of us. We're going to go through 5 stages of story. We're going to spend about 30 minutes on it, something like that, okay? But before that, Lady Krista, take us inside, and this is so critical what Krista's about to talk to us about. This is how we become part of the revolution. And you think that's like a casual sentence. It's not casual, right? When I step in, when I join, when I become a member, when I let my flow, my energy, my resources, right, create this together, right, then something changes in me. And then we can do this, right? The old time churches and the old time synagogues, the old time mosques, everyone got that was important. In the kind of new age spiritual world, the human potential world, everyone thinks, oh, someone else is going to do it. I'm going to come and have an experience. That's not going to work. We have to create an actual sense of commitment, radical commitment, where we're radically showing up. And particularly, we have a page in which we write, lots of us are outrageous acts of love. And we've begun it. I'm so happy we've begun it. We've done it for several months, but we haven't yet taken it to the full level that we can. Right? Chris is doing awesome. We're going to all step into this. It's one of the greatest pleasures is committing an outrageous act of love. Right? Outrageous love is not ordinary love. It's the love that moves the sun and other stars. It's what Tagore was talking about when he said, love is not mere human sentiment. It's the heart of existence itself. That's core to the evolutionary story. Evolution is the love story of the universe. For real. For realsies. Ontology. Right? Love, of course, evolves. Love becomes awake at the human level. Right? But love evolves all the way from the beginning. Evolution is the love story of the universe, and that's what we call outrageous love. Outrageous love is the love that's driving, the eros, the allurement that drives and holds all of reality. So when I commit an outrageous act of love, I become evolution in person. And Krista's holding this whole field for us. So I turn the word to Lady Krista to tell us how we personally are implicated in this and how we step in. Yay. Okay, take it away, Krista. Thank you so much. You on? You good with us?
Yay, thank you, Mark. Awesome introduction to our main practice here in our one church, one communion, one love, where our main practice is committing outrageous acts of love. And we have a Facebook page for that, where as a community, we meet all throughout the week and we share the acts of love that we have personally committed, or we share the stories of the people that we know, or maybe some inspiring stories that we've read on the internet. And we share those stories on that Facebook page as well. And the third thing that we share is our outrageous love letters. Writing outrageous love letters is a beautiful, beautiful practice that Mark has shared with us and has developed. And it's a way to access outrageous love in your own body, in your own heart. And writing them every day is a beautiful practice. And of course, the second step, even better, is sharing them on our Facebook page. And I just want to show you what that looks like. If you go to Facebook, you can find our page. It's called Outrageous Acts of Love, of course. And here you can see it. We are all sharing our stories and inspiring videos. And if you look here, we have Laura sharing her outrageous love letter with beautiful art with it. And it's really a beautiful way here to connect with each other all throughout the week and inspire each other and activate outrageous love in your own life. So if you go here to our Facebook page, please make sure that you click here on the left on community, because this is where all of you can post. And I will make sure to repost all of your posts so they also appear on the homepage. And it's really, really great also if you take some time to read each other's posts and comment on them. And it's a great way to just love each other up all throughout the week. Then next we have our awesome website. Take a look at that right after church. It is onechurch.world. And if you click here on the homepage, maybe you're watching this video later in a replay or on Facebook and you're not signed up yet. This is where you can sign up. Just write your email address here and register, and we will invite you every week to join church live in our Zoom. And that's also where we meet in the Zoom chat as a community. So that's a great way to get involved. And if you're enjoying us here and you want to come even closer, become a member. That is a great way to contribute to this global communion of activists and make sure that all of our projects will be launched into the world and we reach more hearts and more people. So you can choose to make your own unique contribution. It starts from only $25 a month. And with that contribution, you are, of course, contributing to the evolution of love already, which is amazing. But right now, you will also gain access to our online community forum, a beautiful place where we can meet and chat with each other. And you will gain access to these 9 beautiful courses. Each of these courses are recorded on the Outrageous Love Festival. So that is 9 or 8 days of amazing content here, hours and hours that you can study on your own or study together with other members. And there's beautiful practices in there as well, which are inspiring to actually integrate the Dharma into your daily life. So if you want to study more about unique self or goddess eros, the evolution of love, becoming a future human, all of this beautiful Dharma is in these 9 courses, and you will have access to all of them if you decide to become a member of our communion right now. And I can't wait to see you inside. And with that, I give my word back to you, Mark.
Krista, right? Thank you so much, right? And we're just welcoming Krista, who's taken over in the last 7-8 weeks as the lead executive producer, right? Creating One Communion, One Church, Many Paths, One Mountain, changing the world through outrageous love. And let's just give her a huge hand, like around the world, right? And just pour energy into her and love, right? As she leads this initiative, right? So yay, right? Are we excited about that? Are we excited? Who's excited? I'm like wildly excited, wildly excited. And yes, someone wrote earlier in the chat box, right? It's a hurricane of excitement. Someone asked, are we in the middle of a hurricane in Florida? Yes, we are, right? And I'm glad, right? We're in the middle of hurricane and hurricane winds and all sorts of things happening, but we are here and we're pouring that hurricane, right, into gorgeousness, right, into being together right here in this moment. Okay? So yay, yay, all the beauty. Wow, wow, wow. Are we ready? We're ready to take the next step? So here we go. Let's breathe for a second. gentle. Our love code for this week, our evolutionary love code. We're now in part 2. We are in sense making, articulating first principles, which are the necessary step at this moment in time, at this time between utopia and dystopia, right? The way through as we face catastrophic and existential risk is to actually, as it was in the Renaissance, at that time between worlds, at that time between stories, so too in this time between worlds, and this time between stories, and this phase shift, we're articulating a new story. But by a new story, we don't mean a fanciful conjecture. We mean the best articulation of first principles. And first principles means structural principles which are the nature of cosmos, which are universal. When Einstein talked about a cosmological principle, he was talking about the assumption that the same principles work across cosmos. There's a set of principles. They're interior and they're exterior. And they work all the way through time, all through the space-time continuum, right? They're an essential set of structural laws. And it's unbelievably important to understand them. And they're not dogmatic. They're not owned by any religion or tribe or country. They're evolving, right? The more we learn, the more we understand them. But they're a set of shared universals, of shared first principles. To know them, we integrate all of the ways we have of knowing, all of the ways of pre-modernity, the interior sciences of the great traditions, all of the sciences of modernity, and all of its approaches, its manifold ways of knowing, all of the insights of post-modernity and structuralism, and all of the ways of human knowing and all of the wisdom traditions are integrated, all of the parts, and then we're creating a new whole, right? It's bringing together and creating new knowledge. And we're articulating this new knowledge not in complicated complexity, although we're writing a great library of 30 major volumes. We've written about half of now, 30 major volumes that are all related and are all necessary, a literally kind of Da Vinci great library of this new story. So there's lots of footnotes, lots of depth. But here in One Communion, One Church, Many Paths, One Mountain, we're doing sense making. How do we make sense of reality? We're doing sense making through the first principles, and we're interpreting them in terms of what we call second simplicity, which means the simplicity after complexity. So level 1 is simplicity, right? So simplicity is a simple take on the world. But then we complexify. We take an enormous amount of new information into account. New science information, new anthropological information, new psychological information, right? New information about every form of human knowing. We integrate that information. That's a lot of complexity. And then we bring it together into a new set, a second simplicity. Not a first simplicity. Second simplicity is the simplicity after complexity. Okay? So what we're talking about this week, right? The code is about loneliness, the fundamental movement of reality. It is the movement from loneliness to loving, from alienation to integration. And it's the movement of eros itself, the experience of radical aliveness, seeking ever deeper contact, intimacy, and ever larger wholeness. So what we talked about in the last 2 sense-making sessions was this notion that loneliness is the inability to share your story. A fundamental idea, but not just at a psychological level. It's actually a much deeper level. It's actually, my story matters. My story is not just what they used to call in the Eastern traditions mistakenly, right? The relative, right? In the Eastern traditions and some of the Western mystical traditions, there's this emphasis on the absolute. And then your story, right, your personal life, that's called the relative. A friend of mine, a good friend, who I like a lot, right, wrote a book. And he talked about the impersonal as the goal. That's the absolute. And the personal as being what you need to move beyond, right? He's a good man, but that's a fundamental mistake, as I pointed out to him. And we've talked about it extensively, and I actually wrote a book called Self, 2 Models in Integral Evolutionary Mysticism, critiquing my friend's position. And he actually called me at some point and said, wow, right, I get that, right? I missed that. Thank you, which was beautiful of him and gorgeous of him. And we've learned from each other a lot. So this notion of the impersonal or the absolute being the goal is a mistake. There's the personal, level one. Above that is the impersonal, right? The forces of cosmos. But then above that is the personal, meaning the impersonal itself is an expression of this deeper personhood. So personality or separate self, or what's usually called your story, that's level one. Then you move beyond your story, from separate self to true self, you realize you're part of the larger field of consciousness. You're part of the larger field of consciousness and desire. You're part of the larger field of consciousness, desire, and allurement. You actually become one with the evolutionary impulse. So that's called, right, identification with the absolute forces of cosmos, the absolute consciousness, right, the evolutionary impulse moving in you. So that's understood as the impersonal. Usually that was understood as the end of the maximal human awakening. What we've understood in the last 10, 15, 20 years, and we've begun to share with the world, is this notion of the personal beyond the impersonal. And the personal beyond the impersonal, that's your story. That's your story, not at level one, but at level three. Not level one personal, right? After level one personal is the impersonal, but then above that is the ultimate personhood of cosmos. So God has a face, or infinity has a face, which is impersonal, the flowing of cosmic forces. For example, the strong and the weak nuclear, the electromagnetic, the gravitational. But actually, those forces, right, are one dimension, one face of cosmos. You might call it the third person of cosmos. But there's a second person, and the second person is the infinity of intimacy. It's the personhood of cosmos. And your story is not just your individual psychological separate self story, but your story is part of the larger story of reality. Your story is chapter and verse in the narrative arc of cosmos itself. Now stay close. Can we stay close together? Because now we're doing first principles. The notion that there's a narrative arc to cosmos is a big deal. And I'm going to, with your permission, I'm checking the time. I hope to tell you three, but I'm at least going to tell you two stories today. So two big stories coming up, okay? And we're going to hear from Barbara. And we're deep in first principles now, okay? So it's like, are we in? Are we good? Now we're doing the work now. We're actually doing the revolutionary work of articulating the first principles that allow us to do sense making, that allow us to move not to dystopia, but to utopia, to actually articulate the next phase of evolution at this phase shift in human history. So that's when I check in with everyone. Everyone understand what we're doing? That's what we're doing here, okay? So let's just feel this for a second. Let's feel it deeply. There's this notion, we in? We good? There's this notion I've got to embrace my story and know that my story is chapter and verse, right? Who's a yes? Who else is a yes? Are we a yes? Are we together? Okay, right? That my story is chapter and verse in the narrative arc of cosmos. And the notion that there's a narrative arc of cosmos is not a given. So most of dogmatic materialist science assumes that cosmos is a set of principles that are arbitrary, accidental, right, random, which is a poor understanding, and actually inaccurate on many, many profound levels. And there is no story to cosmos. That's a mistake. Now, can we stay deep in this together? And Tom Goddard, this next piece is for you. There's a dimension of cosmos that's random in the sense that there's a dimension of conversation that's random. So let's say Tom and I are on the phone, and let's say we're doing Holy of Holies study, for example. It means we're doing deep study together, which Tom and I did for a lot of years. We studied together. So we could be talking about a lot of things. And that conversation is, there's a spontaneity in it. There's a freedom in the conversation because there's a deep intimacy between us as we're talking. And in that conversation, random movements and currents in the conversation could come up, which we would follow. But that randomness is within the context of a larger storyline. It means we're studying together. We're studying for the sake of the emergence of unique self and for the sake of the evolution of love and for the sake of the fullness, goodness, truth, beauty, and creativity of reality. So all of our conversations are part of this overarching arc. So although there's a randomness in our conversation, it's not a prescribed text, right? There's a freedom, a spontaneity, but it's spontaneity in the context of a larger story, of a larger trajectory, of a larger plot line. That's critical. So science is right and beautifully in identifying a notion of randomness in cosmos there is a notion of randomness. So for example, if you watch horses galloping, right? So there's a randomness, there's a freedom in the galloping, and yet horses are drawn by the eros of the gallop. Horses chose, right, the gallop. There's a moment which Darwin understands there's an actual interior choice within the animal world, and at a particular evolutionary point, horses chose that way of emerging, that way of galloping, and they're drawn by, right, the eros of galloping, right? So we're drawn at the human level by the eros of the evolution of beauty and the evolution of love. And so when Tom and I talk, there's a randomness in the conversation, but the conversation has a direction. Now stay close with me, okay? Stay close. So cosmos is a conversation, right? We live in a conversational cosmos. And the conversational cosmos, right, begins right at the very level, right, of, right, the elementary elements at the very beginning of cosmos. We start with hydrogen and helium. And then, right, as we explode into galaxies, stars, right, there's 100 new elements, right, that are later at a later stage in cosmos that are released. But written into, right, encrypted, inscripted on the walls of emptiness is a field of intimacy, a set of first principles, right, a direction to cosmos, right? There's a haunting telos, right, that animates all of cosmos. So cosmos begins as a conversation between quarks, between hadrons, muons, leptons, right? There's a randomness in the conversation in the sense that there's a freedom and there's a direction, right? It's clearly going somewhere. It's not by accident that we always talk about moving from bacteria to Bach. Bacteria itself is this incredible music, an incredible amount of, right, exploding interactions of very precise interactions of intimacy happening at the bacterial level. At the bacterial level, every second, right, there are interactions of intimate, unique, gorgeous configuration happening. But you move all through history from bacteria to Bach, right? And you see this we move from quarks to culture. We move from dirt to Shakespeare, from mud to Mozart. And at every level, there's this unfolding and evolution of this deep conversation that's moved by, drawn forth by the telos, by the direction of cosmos. So we live in a conversational cosmos, and the cosmos is telling a story. And it's a story of the evolution of love. It's a story of more and more truth, right? More and more life, right? More and more beauty, right? More and more caring, right? More and more, and along the way, the more complex it gets, there's potential for breakdown, potential for pathology. And as we've said many times, rocks don't get cancer, horses do, right? So as it's more complex, there's also more beauty, more potential, right? More potency, right? And yet also more potential for pathologizing, more potential for pain. And in this life, of course, is part of a larger field of reality. So when we leave this lifetime, we don't disappear, right? This lifetime is part of a larger field of consciousness that moves beyond the boundaries, right, of how we experience life in our embodied form. And it's a much wider field, and there's an enormous amount of validated information on that. That's not a dogma. An enormous amount of validated information on that, but put that aside for a second. So it's a conversational cosmos, and as we get to the human level, right, we get to human life, we go from matter to life to mind, right? At the human level, we might say that life is a series of conversations. So to take it to your life, take that atomic level now, all the way up, all through the matter, all through the levels of the explosion of matter, all through the physiosphere, billions and billions of years, till several billion years ago, and we get to the biosphere. Then we go through a few billion years, and we get actually to quite recently, the last several hundred million years. And then ultimately we get to 67 million years ago after the last mass extinction. And then we have the explosion of mammals, and we get to hominids on the savannah, we get to human life. And then when human life happens at a certain point, 150,000 years ago, a little more, a little less, right? Unclear, right? There's an explosion of language. Language, right? This explosion, the conversational cosmos takes this leap forward. And our lives, yours and my lives, our life is a series of conversations. That's what they are. Like, wow. And those conversations are part of the stories of our lives. So cosmos itself is not merely chance, merely accidental. That's statistically absurd in terms of the complexity that's released. Right? Cosmos itself is telling a story. There's a narrative arc to cosmos, from matter to life to mind, and then levels of the story in matter, and levels of the story in life, and levels of the story in mind. That's wow. And so there's getting that. Yuval Harari, who I disagree with pretty much, most of what he writes. He's a great storyteller of history, but his assumptions about the nature of reality are dogmatic and naive. But Yuval gets one thing really right, and blessings to Yuval, and I look forward to having a conversation and going deep. And he wrote a book called Homo Sapiens, and I think it's a beautifully written and bad book in terms of its initial assumptions and damaging, right, in a very fundamental way, right, because it makes a series of assumptions about a dogmatic materialist cosmos in 3 paragraphs in the beginning of the book, right, which are just wrong. But bracket all that, right? Yuval, great job on the book in 2nd chapter, where Yuval says that what we need is a new story, and that only a new story changes reality. Right? Sam Harris, actually, in a dialogue with Yuval like several years ago, says, right, we need a new story. I read your history book. I need a new story. And Yuval says, I'm not the place for a new story, but you're absolutely right, right? New story is the essence. And Harari says correctly, it's only a new story that creates a next leap in evolution. Harari's mistake is that a story is just a fiction. Harari's lost in the throes of postmodernism, which he was raised on the Tel Aviv street, and he can't quite find his way out of it. A new story is not just a fiction. A new story can be the best integration of knowledge we have to give the best understanding of interiors and exteriors coming together to create a larger reality. Right? But reality is moved by stories. We don't think in terms of facts, although facts are critical, but facts are always part of a larger story. And we need to be telling the best story we can. The story is the framework in which we live. It's the worldview in which we live. It's how we organize reality. But that's not merely a social construction. There's an evolution of story. Story gets deeper, story gets wider, story begins to include more people, story includes more information, more facts. So reality is not a fact, reality is a story. And reality is not an ordinary story, reality is a love story. And it's not an ordinary love story, it's an evolutionary love story, it's an outrageous love story. So getting the centrality of story is a very big deal. So what I want to do is I want to take you into story one step deeper and then turn to Barbara, right? To actually, right, feel into this code. This movement from loneliness to loving happens not just when you share your story with someone else. That's not enough. The movement from loneliness to loving happens, right? From alienation to a sense of union, a sense of belonging, a sense of being a home, happens not just when you share your story psychologically, it's when you recognize that your story is intended by Cosmos, that your story is needed by Cosmos, that your story matters, that your story is chapter in verse in the love story of Cosmos, that your love story, the love story of your life and the pain of your life and the tribulation of your life and the trauma of your life and the beauty of your life and the poignancy of your life and the details of your story that have a lot of randomness in them. There's a lot of spontaneity, there's a lot of freedom, but their overarching arc is infinity individuating as you, and infinity individuating as your personal story. So the story of Cosmos is individuating as you. And that's not figuratively true. That's not figuratively true. See if I can speak a word clearly. That's literally true. Right? The literal understanding of the sciences today is that we actually understand that all of the physiosphere, meaning all of matter and all of the memory of all of the possible movements of matter, all of the complex movements within the world of matter, the world of elements and quarks, subatomic particles, atoms and molecules and complex molecules, all of that lives in you, and all of its evolution lives in you. And then all of the story of life, of prokaryotes, and then eukaryotes, single-celled, multicellular organisms, and then multicellular cells, right, multicellular, right, then organisms, right, and then, right, all of the levels of life from neural net, neural cord, all the way up to mammals, and then later mammals, and then hominids on the savannah, it all lives in you. The entire story of evolution. And then there lives in you, literally we know developmentally that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, meaning all of the developmental levels, all the stories of the human being at all the levels, all those stories live in you. And you actually go through them in your actual life history. You go through the stages of the human story of history. You go through them in your own life. It all lives in you, and it all crystallizes in reality desperately wanting to be Sally. It's all reality wants, just wants to be Sally. And reality's madly in love with Sally. So how can I not be madly in love with Sally when reality is? Right? Right? Madly. And desperately needing her unique voice, the artistry of her pen, the depth of her experience, her turning fate into destiny, the beauty and luster in her eyes, right? The intelligence, right? Right? Reality needs all of that. Reality needs all of David, right? All of reality, all of the stories of reality live in the unique story, right? That is David, reality having a David experience. I was like, wow, that's shocking. That's shocking. So therefore, your story is needed by reality. Now, let me see if I can just take you through for a second, right? Just take it within this context. Here's the levels of story so we kind of get how we got here. So the first level of story, right, that exists kind of in the lineages, right, is this notion of telling the story of the origin of the world. So all the lineages have, they call it the story of creation. Let's tell the story of creation. That's the first level of story. So for example, in Hebrew lineage, there's what they call Ma'aseh Bereshit, which is the Ma'aseh, the deed or the story of Bereshit, of origins, of creation. That's always the first level of story. And that is, in Genesis chapter 1, there's a version of that story. In every great tradition, there's a version of that story. Science has a version of that story. It's the universe story. It's the telling of the universe story. That's one level. Now then, that's the first level of story. Now, in the way that first level of story was usually told is it had nothing to do with the human being. And it's the way the great traditions told that story. That's the God force manifesting reality. And then the God force waves reality into existence over a short period of time. And then the God force waves the human being into existence, places the human being in the center of the universe. The human being lives in the universe. And the human being lives their own story, which is the challenge to live in accordance with their highest and deepest self, in accordance with principles of cosmos. And that's the challenge of life. And if you succeed in that, you get this gorgeous reward in the world to come. And there's some deep truth in that, but it's insufficient. It actually doesn't quite match reality. Then we go deeper, right? We go deeper, right? We go deeper, right? That was the first level of story, right? Ma'aseh Bereshit, right? The metaphysical story of the world coming into existence, right? The story of origins. Again, there were weaknesses in the story that we just pointed to. But before we point to how we overcome those weaknesses, I want to give you the next level of story. The next level of story was the nationalist story, right? You tell the story of God's involvement in your people, how your people came into being. So it became the story of a particular nation, a particular kingdom. That became the major story. That was the second level of story. So the first level of story is the story of origins. The second level of story is the nationalist story, but by the nationalist story, we mean the story of the origin, not of cosmos, but the origin of your people, of your tribe. You identify with the story of your tribe, right? Whether it's the story of how Holland came into existence or how, right, Belgium came into existence, how the United States, right? The story of Germany, right? The story of the different parts of Asia, the stories of Africa, right? The stories of every religion, or it's the origin of your people, right? That's a second story. Okay, it's a second story. And those were the first two major stories. And those stories, people lived in those stories. Those were the inescapable frameworks in which people lived. Then there's a third level of story. Everyone with me? Third level of story. And the third level of story, and exists in every great tradition in different ways, right? It's the story of the enlightened ones. The stories of the sages and the seers and the rishis, right? The prophets, the shamans. So this is the story of the superpowered people, of the God-intoxicated people. Does everyone get that? That's the third level of story, right? Kirsten's trying to think about how to write it, right? It's the story of the enlightened ones, right? The story of, right, the superpowered people. Right, it's the story of the sages. Let's get a few words down here. The sages, the saints, right? The rishis, right? The seers, right? The shamans, right? The kings, right? It's that story. It's the story of people who transformed themselves and became one with the principles of cosmos. The people who achieved this massive greatness. We call that in the lineage Sipurei Tzadikim, right? The story of the righteous ones. That's the third level of story. Okay? And those are the three levels of story that basically existed in Cosmos. Until we make this huge leap. Until we make this huge leap. And this is level 4. And this level 4, this huge leap, this is where it comes together. So in level 4, we begin to realize that we need to democratize enlightenment. And the democratization of enlightenment means that the story of the enlightened ones has to become the story of every individual. Does everyone get that? That's a hugely important idea. That actually every human being has a sacred story. And that the story is not just the relative story of your separate self, which is your personality, which you need to move beyond in order to become in union with the field of consciousness. No, that the movement beyond your separate self and become part of the larger field is critical. That's a key piece of your story, but that's not the whole story. Actually, the story of your individuated life matters. It's not just something you transcend, right? The notion in mysticism of move beyond your story. How many people, I'm going to turn to the chat box here, right? How many people have heard that spiritual phrase, move beyond your story, right? Got to move beyond your story. No, that's a mistake. You have to transform your story. You transform your story, right, from your separate self story into your unique self story. And your unique self story is your personal story beyond ego, right? It's the personal on the other side of the impersonal. It's the higher individuation beyond ego. The higher individuation beyond ego, the higher individuation, try and get my words not slurring. The higher individuation beyond ego is not your separate self story, right? It's your unique self story. It's your evolutionary unique self story. Now, that's the beginning of the movement from Homo sapien to Homo amor. Everyone get that? If someone could turn off your sound, someone just turned their sound on, just maybe mute yourself for a second, just so we'll have a clear line. That'd be awesome. Thank you so much. Okay? So that movement to your unique self story, right, is one that applies to every individual. It's no longer the elite enlightened ones. We have to democratize enlightenment, in which we realize that every story matters, that no story is extra, and that every person has business, right? The real business of living. Everyone's got business in this world. Everyone's got something to do and somewhere to go and a transformation, right, to accomplish and a song to sing and a story to tell and a poem to write that matters ultimately. Okay, now let's put it together. At this fourth level, what you realize is that the story of origins, right, the metaphysical story, the cosmic story, the universe story, and your personal story are part of the same field. That's the momentous breakthrough. That's the movement from Homo sapien to Homo amor, right? The movement from Homo sapien to Homo amor is you begin to realize my story is not an accident, and it's not just my social, psychological, and cultural conditioning. I'm being lived by Cosmos, right? I am evolution in person, right? My deepest heart's desire is the desire of reality, right? My story is chapter and verse in the love story of the universe. And my personal evolution, right, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. This is Sally Adams, the first phrase we ever talked about, right? So let's take this deeper. It means my personal ontogeny, meaning my personal story, right, actually participates, my personal evolution, my personal transformation is part of the evolutionary story of reality. And when I actually awaken at the leading edge, and I push my edge and I choose intimacy, and I choose life, and I choose to move out of the depression and into the joy that animates my creativity, and I choose to actually say that yesterday's not the slave driver that determines today, and I choose to create, and I choose to sing my song, and I choose to live the fullness of my unique self, which means, right, all of the fullness of my emotional range and the fullness of my beauty and the fullness of my goodness, just living it, right, just living that story, right, without any public, just living that story day to day in the details of my life actually evolves reality. Right, that realization that my story and the story of origins are one story, that all of the origins live in me, and that I'm taking it the next step. That's the movement from Homo sapien to Homo amor, okay? So I want to go one more step with you, okay? Here's the last step, and then I'm going to tell you a story. I promised you 3, but let me give you at least one, okay? At least one story. just to get how much it matters. Okay, you guys up for a story? Then Barbara's going to finish our sense-making session, right? The last 10 minutes. So thank you everyone for being with us. Okay, are we good? Who's up for a story? Who's up for a story? So I'm going to tell you a story, okay? So this is a story about a master in the lineage tradition of Hebrew wisdom, right? Who is called the great master, the great seer, right? Of Lublin, right? And Lublin is the place that my father was raised and my grandfather. I was actually in Lublin not that long ago. It's right near the Majdanek concentration camp. And all of Lublin was actually, the entire Jewish population was killed. It's an incredibly tragic story. But Lublin also was a place of enormous mystical creativity, of just the most beautiful kind, the great interior scientists of Lublin. And so there was a master who's one of my original lineage masters, named the Holy Seer of Lublin. And a couple comes to the Seer of Lublin and they say, we want to have a baby. And all of us want to have a baby. And sometimes it's a physical baby in this world. We want to come together to birth a physical baby. And sometimes we want to impregnate each other and birth a new book, a new project, a new vision, right? A new, right, Netflix special, right? A new, right, shared gorgeousness in the world, right? We want to birth something in the world, right? We want to do something, we want to share something that's never been shared. And so we come together as unique selves. But this couple wanted to birth a baby, a physical baby. They were desperate to have a baby. And they come to the seer, and the seer says to the man, he says, could I talk to you alone? And so his wife steps out, right? And the seer says, he says, you were engaged once before, weren't you? And the man goes white and he says, yes, I was. And he says, something happened. What happened? And the man said, well, I just, it wasn't right. And I broke off the engagement. And the seer says, and you caused her enormous pain and suffering. You need to go find her and ask for her blessing. And when you get her blessing, then you'll have the blessing to, with your wife, your partner today, to have a child. And so the man looks at the seer of Lublin, who could see from one end of the world to the other, and he says, where should I go? But where should I go? I don't know where she is. And the seer looks at him and he says, go to Ludomir, Ludomir, Ludomir. Go to the markets in Ludomir and bring your wares there and search for her there. And then he ends the meeting. And the man goes out and he tells his wife that he's got to go to Ludomir, which is quite far away, and he gathers his wares, right, his merchandise, and he travels to Ludomir in order to find, right, his wife. And his wife's name was Fagala, right? Fagala, right? A sweet name, right? Fagala. And he's looking for her. He's looking for her. Fagala Sarah, right? That was her name. And he looks in every place he looks, and he sees someone that looks like her, and the person turns around, and he thinks it's going to be her, and it's not her. And he's there for 3 months at the fair, and he sells all of his wares, and he's looking every night. He goes and he looks in all the possible places. He can't find her. There's no place to be found. And finally, it's the last day, and he's dejected, and he's brokenhearted, and he's got to now pack up, whatever profits he's made, and he's got to travel home and tell his wife that he didn't find Fagala Sarah, and he didn't get the blessing. And it's storming, right? There's like a virtual hurricane like there is right now in Florida, and it's storming, and he gathers up his wares, and he goes under a sheltering, right? A dark shelter, right at the end of the day, with all of his, right? He's holding everything, and there's another figure there that, that's there, and so he moves away, and the voice of the other figure, he can't recognize the face, says, you always move away from me, and now you're doing it again. Oh my God, it's her voice, Fagala Sarah. And he looks and he can barely see, it's dark, he can barely see the outline of her face. And he says, I've been here, I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you everywhere for the last 3 months. And she says, I know. And he says, I'm so sorry for 30 years ago. I couldn't do it. She says, I know, but you broke my heart. You broke my heart. And he says, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. And she says, there's something you can do for me. And if you do this for me, you'll have repaid the debt the karmic debt, and I'll forgive you. And he says, and will you give me a blessing to have a child? And he can feel the tears streaming down her cheeks. And she says, yes, if you do this service for me, I'll forgive you and I'll give you a blessing to have a child. And he says, what's the service? And he says, you remember the town, the shtetl, the little town in which we lived. My brother is marrying off his daughter and he has no money. And as you know, it's quite a distance from here. It'll take you 3 days, right, on your best horse. And I know you're here with your wagon, with your horses. Take your best horse, leave everything behind, and bring him the money, right, to make the wedding and to create the dowry and to give his daughter, my niece, right, a start in life. If you do that for me, I'll forgive you and I'll bless you. And the man says, yes, Fegala Sarah, of course I will. She says, go. And he goes and he gives his assistant all of the wares, and he jumps on the horse and he takes all the money he's made the last 3 months with him, and the horse begins to gallop and they begin to go. And he doesn't stop, literally, right? Literally, he just rests. He sleeps in the saddle. He stops for, a half hour here, a half hour there. He travels 3 days and 3 nights exhausted. He's got to get there. He promised to get there right before the wedding. Right? He's disheveled, mud splattered. He finally gets to the town, and he remembers the town. He hasn't been there for 30 years. He finds his way. He remembers where the man who was going to be his brother-in-law lives, and he bangs at the door. He gets there at 2 a.m. He bangs at the door, and his brother-in-law he hasn't seen for 30 years, of course, doesn't recognize his mud-splattered, exhausted, bedraggled face. And he says, I'm here, and I brought you money for the dowry, right, to make the wedding for your daughter. And his daughter says, who are you? Right? Who are you? Why are you here to mock me? I have no money for the wedding. I have no money, right, for my daughter because I lost everything in a business deal a year ago. And you come to mock me as some poor beggar. He says, no, I'm not a poor beggar. Remember, it's me, it's Yankala. I was going to be your brother-in-law 30 years ago. And he looks at him and he says, it's Yankala. He says, but what are you doing here? Why are you coming here? Why are you? And he says, no, I just met Fegala Sarah. I was in Ludomir, and she told me to come, and she told me you were having the wedding. And the man who was going to be his brother-in-law looks at him and he says, don't you understand? Fegala Sarah died 30 years ago, just a couple of weeks. Her heart was broken after you broke the engagement. She died 30 years ago. Wow. And he gives him the money that Fegala Sarah told him to give him. And he stays for the wedding. And the wedding was the most beautiful, the most joyous. And his unfinished business was finally completed. And he travels home. And he tells his wife that they had received the blessing. And they make love on that evening. And they conceive a daughter. And they name her Fegala Sarah. And that daughter grows up and gets married and conceives a son who becomes one of the greatest masters who ever lives. So you see, my friends, our stories matter. Our stories matter. We all have business to do, and we all have unfinished business. To move from loneliness to loving is to tell your story and to realize, and I want to invite everyone this week to actually write your story. Actually, write 5 pages. Tell your story. Write your sacred autobiography. But realize that your story is chapter and verse in the universal love story, and that you have unfinished business. All of us have unfinished business, and you can't receive the blessing for the next part of your story until you finish that business. And it's the people that we've hurt. It's the parts of us that we've split off. It's the parts of our story that we haven't lived. It's our greatness that we haven't claimed. It's the places we haven't asked forgiveness. It's the trauma that we haven't allowed ourselves to move beyond. It's the places that we haven't chosen life. To actually feel in an unblocked way the evolutionary impulse moving through you, you have to take off your body armor. You have to move out of the old patterns. And you have to begin to actually claim life. Unfinished business. Who among us doesn't have unfinished business? When I go to finish that business, I can then step into the next part of my story. And I have the energy to do it, the eros to do it, because I realize that reality needs my story, that infinity has individuated as story. Infinity individuates as the universe, a love story. And infinity individuates as my story, which is chapter and verse in the universal love story. So the movement from Homo sapien to Homo amor is to know that the way the evolutionary impulse moves in me, that unique way in which I am lived by love, in which I'm danced, is the intention of reality. And that unfinished business that's mine to finish, that allows me to step in fully and to choose life, actually puts me at the leading edge of evolution. It allows me to play my instrument in the unique self symphony in a way that's never been played before, and to add a dimension of music that actually feeds the hungry and heals the sick and moves us forward. Oh my God. So this is the Dharma of the movement from loneliness to loving. And Barbara's going to take some of these principles and take us the last 10 minutes. So thank you for staying in First Principles. And beloved Barbara Marx Hubbard, thank you for being with us. And I turn the word.
I want to just read a quote to you from Ilia Delio, who is a great Catholic nun and is a student of Teilhard de Chardin. She speaks everywhere, mainly to Catholic sisters, telling them they cannot remain Catholic unless they understand the new cosmology. Unless they understand that the universe is filled with the impulse of the divine, and that divine is in them, and there's no three-tiered universe, God above, hell below. And she says to them as a Catholic nun, this is wrong. You cannot expect to remain a Catholic and believe the three-tier universe. It's wrong. And so what we're teaching in the evolutionary church is the universe is a love story. It started at the origin of creation with an impulse to connect quarks with electrons, with protons, with neutrons, with people, and now us in the evolutionary church, given this enormous inspiration to reach out with life purpose, to connect and love others in a politics of love. So I want to tell you one of the things that happened to me when I moved here to Sunrise Ranch. Sunrise Ranch is it's in Colorado, Loveland, Colorado. It's founded by the Emissaries of Divine Light. And the founder of it and several others with Mark and myself formed something called the Planetary Mission. Basically, the planetary mission is the overall goal of the evolutionary church. It is a planetary awakening in love through a unique self symphony. Literally to reach out, invite people everywhere in the world who are moving towards being co-creators to join together their creativity and their love until we can infuse the noosphere, the internet, the thinking layer of Earth with our love. And that this is what used to be called the second coming. This is what the Catholics said was the second coming of Christ. What the evolutionary church and the planetary mission is working toward is the evolutionary awakening of love on a mass scale. And I would like to say, I'm realizing this, Mark, as we go deeper and deeper into it, that the evolutionary church is the home of the planetary awakening. It's the home of the politics of evolutionary love.
It is.
The reason I came to Sunrise Ranch is I was invited here because they want to host the planetary mission. They want to create a communication hub for this mission. They want to invite us to assemble there and create together. So I bravely left Berkeley, where I was near my sister, near Mark, near many people I know and love, and headed out to Sunrise Ranch, Colorado with that inner impulse of creativity. And when I got here, we were in the midst of a huge blizzard. I wrote a letter to Mark saying, I'm wintering in Colorado. Well, we were hit with a blast of the coldest possible air. The people were very cordial. They put me in a nice little room. I sat there, and what happened? I felt lonely. I didn't think it was possible for me to still feel lonely after all the things that I've done, but I felt lonely. And the loneliness was so deep. It was like the depression when I was married with the 5 children. There was something missing. I knew enough to say, okay, I've got to act. I used loneliness as an evolutionary driver. And this adds to Mark's dharma of how to overcome loneliness. But the evolutionary driver for me was I have to do something. So I met with my hosts the next day. And I said very simply and humbly, I'm lonely. And what was I lonely for in that instance? It's part of the Dharma that Mark speaks of, for holy conversation. I couldn't live in that community saying hi to people, nodding, and going about my work, being with most people on the internet. I was lonely. Well, of course I was lonely because I didn't have holy conversation. So I said to my host, let's have a meeting every day from 5 to 6 p.m. And we thought of a name for it, Creative Insights at the Heart of the Hub of the Wheel of Co-Creation. And I would be exploring insights of conscious evolution of the evolutionary church with the members of the community at Sunrise Ranch of the Emissaries of Divine Light. So as we started to think of that, then my host said, well, let's decorate this room. Let's have it more festive. And then the question was, well, how about getting this on media? Then how about having the proper lights in order to communicate from the sacred space of the Holy Communion there at Sunrise? Let's communicate to the world. Let's invite everybody to have holy conversations. That happened in one afternoon after my confessing loneliness. So what I got out of this is that I want to go over the Dharma as I understand it of dealing with loneliness. And this is some from Mark and myself. So the first thing to know is that we are one with the impulse of evolution, or what Mark calls interiority. Getting in touch with that interior reality. And for me, it's a process of morning meditation, quieting my mind, then writing out on my journal the situation I'm facing, like I'm lonely, but really the worst of the situations if I can possibly think of them. And then say, dearly beloved, what does this mean? And I turn off my thinking mind, and I believe I tune into the deeper knowing of reality. I used to project it outside myself. I thought it was the Christ or some avatar, but actually I discovered it's totally inside. So by doing that, I realized now I tapped the interiority. And then I was able to read it and be guided by it, learn from it, and then the next day say, here's what happened. Dearly beloved, it didn't work, or this was great, or so I've had a very profound conversation with the dearly beloved interiority. The second part of overcoming loneliness is purpose. And so I'm saying we have to identify the actions we're taking toward a politics of love that only you and I can do uniquely. And purpose is not just, I have a nice project. Purpose is not even just, well, I can go get a good job doing X, Y, or Z. Purpose is tuning in through the interiority with the impulse of that divine creativity within you and say yes to it. The deeper meaning then of the word co-creator is one with the creator within. If I have any understanding of God's intention, it's the creator is to create co-creators. And how do we get to be one with God? By saying yes to our unique creativity. The holy yes, in the holy interiority with the holy conversations that we are going to have so we can remind ourselves and realize we're not alone in our yes. Because if you're saying yes all by yourself, it's extremely lonely, even if you're very, very great. So we consciously create what Mark calls a we space, a resonant field of two or more who are truly excited by what you want to give. It's very important that they're excited by you, but it's not okay. You're not in a we space if they are not thrilled with the impulse that you want to give. Like I am thrilled with the impulse that Mark wants to give, and he actually appreciates the impulse that I want to give. So what happens is holy conversation. But now here's the great thing. We begin to confess our greatness. But what we're confessing together, so each of us can share it with each other, is the impulse of the Creator within us saying yes. Woo! That's a confession of greatness. And finally, to help us, let's co-create our evolutionary church. Let's make it home base for the evolutionary souls on planet Earth. Creating together from the heart of the hub of the wheel of co-creation. This is the social environment we can co-create to share genius, to join our creativity, our love, our oneness, and to actually be the impulse of the politics of evolutionary love at a planetary scale, never existing before. So I'm not lonely right now. I know I might be again later today. Mark, I turn this to you.
God, everyone. Oh my God. Thank you, everyone. How deep is your love? Right? Take us into how deep is your love, our very last second, right? All the way, right? Christina, Tahel, Suzette, anyone wants to take us into how deep is your love? What a gorgeous delight to be together, to do sense making, and to go all the way into love, right? Thank you, Barbara. Barbara, thank you for such a beautiful, beautiful voice and presence and gorgeousness, right? Oh my God. Here we are, right? Peter Goodman, yes, sir. Right? Yes, sir, all the way, all the way. How deep is your love? That's the only question. It's the only question we ever ask, right? How deep is your love?